Welcome. I'm Erik Fleming, host of A Moment with Erik Fleming, the podcast of our time. I want to personally thank you for listening to the podcast. If you like what you're hearing, then I need you to do a few things. First, I need subscribers. I'm on Patreon at patreon.com/A Moment with Erik Fleming. Your subscription allows an independent podcaster like me the freedom to speak truth to power and to expand and improve the show. Second, leave a 5-star review for the podcast on the streaming service you listen to it. That will help the podcast tremendously. Third, go to the website, momenterik.com. There you can subscribe to the podcast, leave reviews and comments, listen to past episodes, and even learn a little bit about your host. Lastly, don't keep this a secret like it's your own personal guilty pleasure. Tell someone else about the podcast. Encourage others to listen to the podcast and share the podcast on your social media platforms because it is time to make this moment a movement. Thanks in advance for supporting the podcast of our time. I hope you enjoyed this episode as well.
The following program is hosted by the NBG Podcast Network.
Hello, and welcome to another Moment with Erik Fleming. I am your host, Erik Fleming. And so today, this is going to be a really, really short one compared to my last few episodes because the Jackson State University had their homecoming week. So I attended those festivities and always glad to go back to my alma mater. So I only have one guest. And I think you're going to like him. He's written a book about an experience he had growing up and how that led to a career that he has been doing for some 3 decades. And more particularly, the work that he is doing, the specific work that he is doing in his career. So I hope you enjoy that interview, and I know you're going to enjoy the brevity of the podcast. I do have a little commentary at the end, but it's going to be real quick because, it was more about me reuniting with some friends and seeing the campus, see what changes had been made, all that stuff. So, yeah. So again, to make sure that you support the podcast, you can go to patreon.com/A Moment with Erik Fleming, or you can go to momenterik.com, the actual website, and do the same thing and do some bonus stuff. All right. So please, please, please do that. Really appreciate whatever support you can give. The subscription is only $1. If you want to give a one-time donation, you can do that too. So just go ahead and check out those platforms. All right. So as I stated, we're not going to keep you long. So let's kick this off with a moment of news with Grace G.
Thanks, Erik. Israel and Hamas signed a ceasefire agreement after 2 years of conflict in Gaza. President Trump escalated his actions towards Chicago with a U.S. Border Patrol raid that targeted gang members, the shooting of an alleged armed U.S. citizen, arresting several protesters at an ICE detention facility, and freezing $2.1 billion in Chicago transit funding. A federal judge temporarily blocked President Trump from sending any National Guard troops to Portland, while a lawsuit against the deployment proceeds. A Florida man was arrested and charged with intentionally starting the devastating Palisades fire in Los Angeles on January 1st. The U.S. Supreme Court temporarily upheld the Trump administration's revocation of temporary protected status for hundreds of thousands of Venezuelan migrants. The Supreme Court also refused to hear Missouri's attempt to reinstate a state law that aimed to prevent the enforcement of several federal gun laws, and Ghislaine Maxwell's appeal to overturn her conviction for aiding financier Jeffrey Epstein in the sexual abuse of teenage girls. A coalition for unions, employers, and religious groups filed the first lawsuit to block the Trump administration's newly imposed $100,000 fee on H-1B visas for highly skilled foreign workers. FBI Director Kash Patel announced the agency had cut ties with the Southern Poverty Law Center, accusing the organization of becoming a partisan smear machine. The family of Andrew Smyrna, an unarmed African-American father killed by a Georgia state trooper during a 2020 traffic stop, reached a $5.5 million settlement. And the city of Atlanta has launched an Atlanta Reparations Study Commission to explore unconventional and non-financial forms of reparations for descendants of those historically displaced and set back by events like the construction of I-85. I am Grace G., and this has been A Moment of News.
All right. Thank you, Grace, for that moment of news. And now it is time for my guest, Steven Eichenblatt. Steven Eichenblatt is a graduate of Florida State University and the University of Florida College of Law. A practicing attorney and father of five, he has spent over 30 years advocating for children as a pro bono guardian ad litem and representing families of first responders killed on 9/11. As a founding partner of Page and Eichenblatt, he has received multiple awards for legal excellence and community work supporting children. He lives with his wife in Orlando, Florida, and he is the author of the memoir, Pretend They Are Dead, A Father's Search for Truth. And so we're going to talk about that book, and we're going to talk about just the experience of being a guardian ad litem. And so, ladies and gentlemen, it is my distinct honor and privilege to have as a guest on this podcast, Steven Eichenblatt. All right, Steven Eichenblatt. How you doing, man? You doing good?
I'm good this morning. Absolutely. Doing well.
Well, I'm glad to have you, and I'm going to pick your brain a little bit, and we're going to talk about a book that you wrote. But before we do all that, I do a couple of icebreakers. So the first icebreaker is I want you to respond to a quote. It is not flesh and blood, but the heart which makes us fathers and sons. What does that quote mean to you?
Well, I could go on quite a bit about that quote, knowing what the subject of my book is, but it means a lot, actually. So it's like the heart is love.
You said the heart is love, or the heart is love?
Heart is love.
Yeah. And we're going to dive into the book, because I know that the gist of the book is about your relationships and I guess struggle with your biological father and even your stepfather. So I need you, the next icebreaker is a game we call 20 questions. So I need you to give me a number between 1 and 20.
18.
All right.
Does that mean I have to answer 18 questions?
No. You get one question. What is one thing we might all agree is important no matter our differences?
Integrity. Living life with integrity.
Okay. All right. Well, I would agree with that. I hope that, in this climate, we can get back to it. But I think the majority of the people in America stand on that statement. I think that.
I hope so. I've been worried about it. I've got 5 kids myself, including one I adopted, and I look at the leaders of the country right now, and putting politics aside, you want people with character that tell the truth, that don't call other people names. I mean, what kind of role model, what kind of examples are we setting for my kids, for everybody else? I mean, Eric, I'm a Democrat, but I will vote both sides. And this isn't a political discussion, but when the Attorney General of the United States is attacking anybody who asks a question personally, it's out of bounds. And I don't consider that leading with integrity or character. I can disagree with you on lots of things, and we won't fight. We'll respect each other. We'll have an intelligent discussion about it.
It's funny you bring that up, because I remember when I was in the legislature and we had a hearing. Me and a gentleman from Clarksville, Mississippi, introduced bills to try to abolish the death penalty in Mississippi. So by virtue, I guess, of our personalities or whatever, we were able to force the committee to actually have a hearing on the bill. And the assistant attorney general for the state of Mississippi, we were still Democrats primarily then. And as far as elected officials, and so he was a Democrat, but he was testifying as to why, because he was in charge of the death penalty cases. So he was testifying why we still needed it. And in his comments, he said that the legislation was stupid. And I asked to be recognized, and I lit into him, and I told him, I said, look, nobody on this panel was elected because we were stupid. We were elected because we wanted to make changes and and this, that, and the other. And so I gave him a ride for about 5 minutes. And I just sat there and thought about what you were saying about Attorney General Bondi and how she was dealing with, especially the Democratic senators. There's a couple of Republicans she jumped into too, but I just said, there's no way. There's no way. That meeting, that thing would have been shut down, because the minute she said something to me, I probably would have responded the minute that she did it to somebody else. It'd have been like, we're going to have to change that or something. We can ask her to leave, because this is not going to happen. Not on national TV. That's not going to happen. So yeah, I feel you on that. We got to get back to some kind of, I don't know.
That's right. And recognizing, during COVID, I'd have these debates with friends of mine who may have been on the other side or still on the other side, and they would be attacking the judges, like the federal judges, and saying, well, this judge would do that. And as a lawyer who has practiced in federal court and who's done a lot of litigation, those judges most of them are brilliant. Forget about their politics. To get to that level, whether you're a Supreme Court justice or a federal court judge, all those people are really qualified. Most of them put politics aside at the upper levels. I'm not talking about your local county judge. And it's frustrating because we have a leader who attacks the justice system. And my son is a lawyer, and he went to the University of Florida, and he was on Moot Court, which for the people who are listening is it's an organization where you argue against other schools. It's sort of like debate. And Justice Clarence Thomas came to the school to speak to the class, which that's a big honor, no matter what you think of politically. And my son got to meet him and spend time with him, and he loved him. He's like, Dad, he is so charismatic. He's so different than what you see, as far as personality and these are smart people, the judges and the people at that level, but it's frustrating.
Yeah. Yeah. All right, so let's talk about your book. And I want to start with you telling the audience about the title of the book and how you got to that title.
The title of my book is called Pretend They're Dead. And Pretend They're Dead, A Father's Search for the Truth. The title came from my biological father gave me up for adoption when I was about 7 or 8 years old. He disappeared out of my life. He was a veterinarian, lived in the same town. And over the years, I never saw him. There was one incident where I saw him, and eventually I reconnected with him when I was in college. He had a major drug problem, and he wound up passing away in a drug-related issue, let's put it that way. Anyway, I write about all that. I found out at his funeral, I went to his funeral, that he had been a writer himself, not just a veterinarian, but a writer. And he had kept a journal and wrote letters virtually every day of his life between 1960 and 1990. Political stuff, anything you can think of, he wrote about, and he wrote a lot about what happened with his kids and his family. And I got all that. And then several years later, my cousin, who is the one who gave me the boxes of his writing, sent me a story, and the story was called Hello Yellow, and it was about the last night that my biological father spent with me. And in that story, which was published in a national magazine, he explains that the reason he left us and the reason he wouldn't see us, even though he lived right down the street virtually, was because the psychiatrist told him to pretend they are dead. And that's exactly what happened. So felt like that was a really compelling title. It was horrible advice to pretend your kids are, because of course he couldn't pretend we were dead. You could tell through all of his 30 years of journaling, it killed him. It really did. So, but that's where the title comes from.
Yeah. So you mentioned that he left you. He was out of your life when you were about 8 years old, but you had a chance encounter. I don't know. It wasn't really an encounter, but it was an experience where you saw him, I think about 8 years later. And I know you want people to read the book and all that, but kind of, cause you kind of hit us with it at the beginning. So kind of talk about that encounter.
Yeah. And I don't mind talking about it. This is my memoirs on the shelves. It's, I hope people buy it. I hope they listen and they like me. But there's there's lots of stuff in there that I can't talk about because I don't have time. But this is such a crazy story. When I was 16, I was working at a tennis club, and I was the only person there at the club. It was July 4th, 1975. So a lot of your listeners probably weren't alive. I was alive, and I was there, and I was working. I was the maintenance guy at the club, and I hear this scream, tire screeching. Car hits a telephone pole about 50 feet from where I am. Now, I'd never seen anything like that. I've never been in a serious car accident. I'd never seen a car accident. I'd never seen somebody bloodied and all that, but my heart's thumping. I run to the front of the car. There's a guy that went through the windshield. I run back to like the payphone, dialed, 0, because back then there wasn't 911, and the police come and all the ambulances come. And, this guy, his face is basically split in two, blood all over, was unconscious when I saw him. They bring him in, went back up by the car. They had him leaning against the side of the car as the ambulance is coming. I mean, this is 1975, got a bunch of gawkers and onlookers, and I had left my Schwinn varsity 10-speed, which I was very proud of, my bicycle. That was my transportation. I didn't have my own car. I left it by a tree, and I started walking to the tree, and I felt this presence on me. I felt somebody looking at me. I just, you get that feeling of somebody looking at you, even though you're not looking at them, like that energy. And I turned, and I could see this man had regained consciousness, and he's literally, his eye was split in two, and his good eye was looking at me. And this feeling came over me. And at that time, the police officer pulled out his wallet and said, "Does anybody know this man?" And I didn't say anything. I got on my bike. I rode away. And I didn't tell anybody for 40 years that man was my biological father.
Wow. How crazy was that? That, just a circumstance. What did you take from that? Did you have a sense of, when you look at it in hindsight, did you think that was like a moment where he was trying to inadvertently trying to connect and or reaching out for help? Or I just, what was your thoughts? And then why did you feel that you had to keep that bottled up for all those years?
When I looked like learning the 2 years later, I learned that he had actually heard that I worked at the club. So he was probably doing a drive-by. Whether he would have actually stopped to talk to me, probably not, because it turned out that he'd stalked me for a number of years, didn't have the courage to actually talk to me. And at that time, in that situation, he'd had a few drinks and taken some Valium or whatever. He was not coherent when he hit the telephone pole, which maybe that saved him. But what's interesting, Eric, and because I went through a lot of stuff as a kid, and lots of people go through lots of things, and these are the cards you're dealt. This is the house you live in. you have no idea what's going on in your neighbor's house. I had 7 brothers and sisters. Their lives were totally different than mine, but I had been so traumatized prior to that by living in the house and some of the things that happened that I really didn't feel them. I felt very little. I mean, it was like, okay, that happened. And the reality is I didn't like go cry in the corner. I didn't even think about that. I didn't go tell my mother or my adopted father or anybody else. It's just another day. Yeah, I mean, it sounds crazy, but it's like, it's like when it's you just put that stuff down, push it down. And I was, I was going to my buddy's house because we were probably going to smoke some dope or get in trouble with teenagers in New Jersey did at 17 years old, 16 years old. And I just pushed it aside.
Yeah. So that experience, how did that impact you? One, well, let's break it down 3 different ways. You're a lawyer by profession, and you're a guardian ad litem as well, and you're also a father. So how did the events that shaped your life from the time you was 8 years old impact those 3 different aspects of your life?
Well, I can tell you, as a, as a person, like I'm a trial lawyer, I'm a competitive person, and I'm a fighter, not physically, but I mean, just, for what's right. And that's why being on guardian ad litem, like helping children, I mean, people are not aware. They don't realize, or maybe they do and they don't care how many kids out there, underprivileged, have no services, have no adults leading them, are just stuck either on the street or in the system with no mentorship. And so going through and living in the house that I went through, and I went through I was in the middle of this horrible divorce custody battle, and my mother shows up with another man who's not a nice person. And I get thrown in a house with the 7 kids, and we all get adopted, together. And back then in the 70s, it was probably pretty common for fathers to hit their kids. And, that wasn't a big deal back then. It wasn't. And I'm not saying it's right or wrong, but I did not want that to happen to anybody else. And I felt by my experience growing up like that, and then seeing some other things in the world and doing a lot of reading about helping underprivileged people, I really, I really dove into helping, kids and families that needed it. So I think the experience of learning how to fight back from having a childhood like that, you have a choice, right? You can, and I have siblings that you can just be a victim and walk around and complain. I got dealt a bad hand, and, and my father abandoned me, and this person was beating me. And so I'm just going to walk around with my head down. But, I chose to use that as energy or fuel to fight back, for other people.
Yeah. So what about fatherhood? Because you're a father of 5 children.
Yes, right, right. And last one, adopted. Yeah, I mean, I think that it it made me too easy as a parent, probably. I spent listen, I had 2 fathers, and neither of them totally. They probably spent 10 minutes in their entire lives with me alone. I wanted to make sure I was at all my kids' games, that they knew I was there for them. I was probably much too easy on them as far as them taking advantage of me in some ways. And, I didn't have a great role model as parents. I had pretty bad role models. And so it was certainly, it certainly affected how I parented. But I think I can say that I was probably too easy in some ways and enabled them in some ways. And then in other ways, I was shut down emotionally and maybe not as loving as I could have been. So those 2 things. I wound up being divorced twice, and I wound up adopting my 3rd wife. I adopted her son, and he is a fantastic kid. And I had more love in my heart. I learned how to be more of a hugger,
Yeah. Well, I understand that journey. I had one biological child, and I inherited, let's see, 5 boys in 3 marriages. And so, it was a little different as far as my dynamics compared to you, but I get it. And it was like, the older I got, the more attached I got with the children. A couple of them didn't respond, cause they were older per se, but yeah, all of us are very critical about how we are as fathers.
Right.
And I talk to my child a lot. He's actually back. I grew up in Chicago, and so they're actually back in Chicago, and had some real candid conversations. And they always try to say, "Well, you were good. Don't beat yourself up, and you didn't have this or you couldn't do that. Don't worry about all that." So, all of them seem to be doing okay. So that's all I can say. So, as a dad, I get that. So let's get into some issues, because I wanted to take advantage of the fact that you are guardian ad litem. And one of the committees I served on in the legislature was juvenile justice. And so, that was those issues. We were caught up a lot in the state facilities that we were dealing with these young people. But we had to deal with guardian ad litem issues as well. So I just want to ask you some questions. As a guardian ad litem, do you think there is enough clarity in the laws and procedures concerning the role or scope of authority of a guardian ad litem?
Probably not. I know that in Orange County, Orlando, Florida, where I am, I volunteer as a pro bono attorney doing that as a guardian ad litem, and they have started structuring it a lot more as far as what the rules are and what guardian ad litems can do and how much power we have or don't have. But they're mainly trying to get lawyers to actually do it, to perform the role, because otherwise DCF, which is Division of Children and Family Services, have to find somebody to fill that spot. And, Orange County Legal Aid does a good job in trying to get the guardian ad litems, trying to train them. So when I started out, because I've been doing it so long, there was very little structure. You're helping that kid, and, that's your job. But it's definitely in Florida, it's gotten more structured, and we got more responsibility. But the guardian ad litem in Florida, you can be you're put on the hot seat by the judge when it comes to helping the judge at the court and everybody to make a decision about where the kid should go.
Yeah. So I guess before we get too deep in the weeds on this, define exactly what a guardian ad litem is for the audience.
Sure. A guardian ad litem is basically an independent person, generally a lawyer, who's appointed to serve the best interests of the child. So if, for example, there's a sexual abuse case and the state is trying to take the kids away from the parents, the court will appoint a guardian ad litem to be involved in helping make the decision on what's the best thing for the child. So my role as a GAL, I can't say GAL, is solely to push all that aside and try to help the kid. So that's and in some states, in some counties, you do not have to be a lawyer. You can be a psychologist. You have different levels here, but so that's what our role is, and it's a really important piece.
Yeah, it was like the young lady that succeeded me in the legislature. She was a family attorney, and she was a guardian ad litem. And, a lot of stuff that she did legislatively was trying to fix that in the state of Mississippi.
It's hard. I mean, you can definitely, like last year, a couple of years ago, I had two boys from the same mom. The mom was 13 and had already had like 5 children. I mean, it's very, very, it's sad. And she was on the street. And one of the kids was born with a lot of intellectual issues because of she had been on coke and all that. And there's so many stories like that out there. And then you have to look at where those kids go and who helps them and how do they get direction and who's going to do that for them. And it takes work.
Yeah. So you had mentioned in your state that they have training. What specific training should a GAL have that is not required now, in your opinion?
Sure. I think a GAL should have some, background in dealing with like domestic abuse, domestic situations, understand a little bit about family law and it not being lawyers, but, understanding some of the issues related to, custody battles, maybe, learn a little bit about, depending on the age of the child, some of the psychological or mental health issues that go along with it. I think it's certainly a case by case thing. I think that they should, it takes a lot of time. So my wife is a volunteer guardian ad litem in Seminole County, which is the next county over. And she spent like a month going out with some of the public defenders or some of the lawyers for the DCF, going on calls to see what they do. I mean, those caseworkers, I'm sure you see in Mississippi, that is the toughest job in the world. That is the toughest job in the world.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. Should a guardian ad litem's report be admissible evidence in court, or is it better that a GAL testifies and submits themselves to cross-examination?
Definitely testifies. I think it's, well, first of all, like in the law, the traditional sense, anything the GAL says, if you can't cross-examine him, could be considered hearsay. A lot of the things that we gather to make our decisions are based on other information out there. So it's really important for both sides to be able to, because there's a certain standards that you have to meet when you're testifying if the kids are going to be taken away from the parents. And when you testify, it's important that the parents' attorneys get the opportunity to ask me why I made the decision that I made and to cross-examine and question it. That's really is an excellent question. And I've been cross-examined a few times where, that's a really tough thing. Sometimes it's really clear where a child should be placed, but sometimes it's not. Or maybe there's allegations out there of abuse, but no one's ever proved it. And, my father left me, man. I don't like taking kids away from their family. That's really rough. And those are hard cases and it really, really is.
Yeah. I think people, it just, when I started doing research and trying to, ask that question, I'm kind of like you. I think it makes sense to actually have the guardian ad litem present and be able to answer questions and scrutiny and maybe clear up some things that you might have seen or observed. Excuse me. And, in a cross-examination, those things could be clarified, right? And so I don't understand what would be the motivation to just say, well, okay, this is my report and, and it's admitted. What would be the motivation to just do it that way as opposed to going under the scrutiny?
Yeah, I think, well, some people are just lazy. And, and that's the easy way to do. Some of the cases they're so straightforward. There's not much to say, but listen, I was appointed, Eric, this is interesting. About 5 years ago, I got a call from Orange County Legal Aid. And listen, I've been doing this probably longer than anybody in Central Florida, not because I'm a god, but because I'm old, because I've been practicing law for 30 years, right? So they said, we need somebody experienced because there's a female lawyer, and she wants to adopt these kids, and she is really difficult. And then she must have said when they asked me like 4 times, be prepared. She wants somebody experienced, so we're asking you to do it. And she was really difficult. But once she realized that I knew what I was doing and I wasn't going to necessarily put up with some of some of what she was complaining about. She had this woman, I mean, really incredible, and she was a really incredible lawyer, but she had she had been at GAL for two teenage girls, guardian ad litem herself. She was unmarried, and she adopted those two girls, which was incredible. But they're teenagers, two teenage girls, and that's not easy. And one of the girls got pregnant. So now, and she's 16. And so you have a 16-year-old girl who's having a baby. And now this attorney who had adopted these two wants to adopt the child that her adopted daughter was going to have. It turned out when I started looking into things that the teenage girl who was pregnant was running like an escort service out of there. They live in this beautiful neighborhood. And this teenage girl, she didn't grow up there. But she'd been adopted when she was a teenager. Was basically when her mom was going to practice law, she was making money doing whatever it was she was doing. And the mom didn't know. And so I had to try to explain, to them what was going on. And but we actually did get through the adoption. She adopted the little girl but crazy scenarios. And there's some saints out there, people who take on really hard situations.
Yeah. So I don't want to dwell too much on that, but so how does that work? Is like if she adopted the mom and then she adopts the daughter, legally that makes them sisters? How does that?
Yeah. Well, she would be like basically she's the grandmother. She was the grandmother.
Oh, okay. I got you.
Yeah. And it's, that girl, I think the teenage girl who had the child, I think she wound up disappearing, because they come from, think about it, a teenage girl where they, who knows what they come from. And, it's really hard when you adopt somebody in that age.
Yeah.
I had a family that adopted a little black a child and a white child at the same time. And these guys, and I was guardian ad litem for them, and these guys are brothers, man. It is the most, and when I adopted my son, they came to the adoption hearing because I had been there in GAL, and it's nice because there's some sort of color blindness there between the boys. I mean, they are brothers, man, just like you are made with your brothers or whatever it is. And you get, you get great stories and great things like that too.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Final question. Should GALs be held to the same standard as a judge or an attorney?
Wow. That's a tricky question because there are times when I say to myself, man, I'm volunteering. The judge shouldn't be giving me such a hard time. But yeah, I think they have to be held to a standard. Maybe if they're a lawyer, if they are a GAL and a lawyer, they absolutely should be held to the same standard. If it's a volunteer who's not a lawyer, maybe they get a little bit of grace, but you have to keep those rules in place. I mean, you really, and judges, most of them, it's situational. The good judges there's a practical reality. I know you were a police officer at some point in your life, and there are times not everything is that clear. Not every person has to be arrested. Maybe they just need to be talked to. Maybe you're a deputy who would give people a chance, but another deputy in the same situation might, never bend the rules. And so I think I guess the answer to the question is that they definitely need to be held to a standard very similar to maybe that of a lawyer, but it's situational.
Yeah. I'm glad you brought that up because that's one thing I think people need to understand about law enforcement, despite the crazy ones that are out there and all that and what we're seeing on TV now, most officers are unlicensed social workers. And, their job is to diffuse the situation if possible.
Yes.
If you don't have to make an arrest, don't. If you've got to bring somebody in, then do it in the most professional and the calmest way possible. The scenarios that we see on TV, yeah, that's not really happening all the time. That's just even in the biggest cities. That's not, if anything there was a show called Southern Justice, and I loved it because, it's rural sheriffs and all that. And, it's like he's trying to solve a crime and he pretty much knows who's done what. He knows what trailer or what house they live in, and call them by their first names. Hey, I know you had something to do with this ATV being stolen or something like that. You know what I'm saying? He said, I might have to put you in the car. Come on. Do you want me to put handcuffs on you or not? And we're going to be a problem. And, I mean, but it's that kind of relationship. You know what I'm saying? And I think that's important for people to know that most of the times when police officers are doing their work, it's, we're just trying to diffuse the situation. So look, how can people get your book? How can people reach out to you, Steven, and, go from there?
Sure. Yeah. My book is called Pretend They're Dead. And Eric, maybe you can put a link, at some point whenever you post this, but you can reach me also www.Eichenblatt. That's my law firm, or Steve Eichenblatt, Eichenblatt, and you'll find me. And listen, if anybody's listening and they have questions or concerns, I would love everybody to buy my book. That would be fantastic. But if you just have questions about what being a GAL is, or what's going on in family court, or how do you not make your kids collateral damage, or any of those things, you can, I'll talk to anybody and try to help them out, or you contact Eric, and Eric will call me and we'll try to figure something out for you. So, that's, it's an underserved community out there when it comes to some of these kids, and, we like to help.
Well, Steve Eichenblatt, I'm really glad that we had the time to talk about this. I hope that your book continues to do well. It's a very, very compelling story. And it's something that, a lot of people can relate to, whether they openly admit it or not. And, but even if you didn't go through the drama, the concept and the desire for a father's love is universal. And so I think you did a great job with that. And again, I wish you much success. And the rule is that now that you've accepted an invitation, you've been on the show, you have an open invitation to come back. So you don't even have to wait for me to ask you. If there's something going on, it's like, yeah, I need a platform. Eric, can you help me out? We'll make that happen. So Steve, thank you so much for coming on, man. I appreciate it.
Yeah, you're welcome. If a time comes up and you need to bounce something by a lawyer, just give me a buzz, give me a call. You got my cell phone number, and we'll talk. Thank you so much, Eric.
Well,
have a good weekend too. Have a great weekend.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much. All right, guys. And we're going to catch y'all on the other side. All right. And we are back. So I want to thank Steve Eichenblatt for coming on the podcast. And I greatly appreciated him taking the time to do that. And just him having the distinction of being the only guest that I have. So I greatly appreciate that. Please go get his book, Pretend They Are Dead. It's very, very powerful. And he's very, very transparent in that book. And you can tell by the interview what kind of solid dude he is. I mean, nobody's perfect. And I don't know him well enough to basically say that he's whatever flaws he's got. But as far as I'm concerned, he's a stand-up dude. And based on his experiences, he has done the most with what he's had to overcome. And, so I greatly appreciate Steven, and I admire him, and I hope that his book continues to take off, I should say, and that he continues to keep doing good work and helping children in the state of Florida. All right. So now I got that out of the way. Let me say something really, really quick. So last week we talked about character. So, now we want to talk about courage, even if it's an illusion. I think we need to address courage. So Marjorie Taylor Greene has taken a courageous stand in going against the president and the leadership of the House Republicans to side with the Democrats on the issue of the shutdown. Now, I know she's not in favor of shutting down the government. She has made that apparently clear. But in this particular case, she understands what's at stake. So, and it's catching a lot of people by surprise, but the reality is that at some point in time, people's humanity has to kick in. And in her case, it was about the health care of her children, right? When she realized that her children who are still under her health insurance, right, that their costs were going to go up. And I think one of her children is still under her plan, from what I understand, and if not both of them. But either way it goes, she realized that it's going to cost more to take care of them, make sure that everything is okay. And we have insurance because this is just in case. It's not, we're expecting to get sick. It's inevitable that something will happen to us, but we want to have the peace of mind, right? That's what the insurance is for. And we want to be able to afford that peace of mind. And so her, even though she's a member of Congress, she wants to have that peace of mind. She wants her children to have that peace of mind, right? You know, for their kids, or if they have kids. I don't know them. I have no idea what's going on. I know she was alarmed when she realized that the subsidies were going to end, and also that she's in a state where, in the wisdom of the state government, they decided not to do the Medicaid expansions, right? See, all these red states that support Donald Trump, y'all broke. Y'all broke people. And the reason why you broke is because the citizens are broke. Yeah, you got low cost of living compared to other states, but you don't pay anybody anything, right? And then, even then, you're losing jobs. Even then, the recessions and all this stuff, the tariffs, all that still hits you. And it hits you harder because you don't have as much disposable income as other folks. Anyway, so in these places where they have higher rates of poverty as well, they play politics instead of pragmatics and didn't expand Medicaid when they had the chance when the Affordable Care Act was passed, because they didn't want to give credit to a black man being president. You can debate it all you want to. That's what it is. Because there's no logical reason why some of the poorest states, hello, Mississippi, some of the poorest states didn't expand Medicaid, right? When you had the chance. Mississippi has the biggest, largest match of any state, and they could have got more money to make sure, at the very least, in a state with the highest rate of child poverty in the United States, at least those kids could have gotten taken care of health-wise. But they want to play politics. So anyway, fast forward to now. Marjorie Taylor Greene is in one of these states. She represents Georgia. She's one of the U.S. representatives from Georgia. And so she did the math and basically came out and said, yeah, I think the Democrats are right on this. I think we need to do something about these subsidies. And the quicker we knock that out, the quicker we can end the government shutdown and keep it moving. If that's all they're asking for, I'm with that, right? So, the cynical people in politics are saying, well, she's looking at poll numbers and all that stuff, but that's never really affected her before. She's taken positions that have not been popular with the masses of people. Now, in her district, she keeps getting reelected. So obviously she's connecting with them, despite my criticism, despite anybody else's criticism, right? But in this case, I don't think she's looking at it, so if she's not looking at poll numbers, and she's definitely not looking at poll numbers now, in my opinion. I think she's looking at bills. And although she makes a good salary being a member of Congress, still money, right? Just because you make more money doesn't mean you want to spend more money, right? Just saying. Yeah, you have more of a range to work with, but you still trying to get the best deal. It's human nature, nonetheless. So all the criticism that I've done with her, with this particular stand and then the stand she's taken with, trying to help the victims or the survivors of Jeffrey Epstein and his sex trafficking ring, I have to commend her for that. And it's only fair. If I was in her position, I would be voting the same way on those same issues. So I commend her for that. Now, we got ways to go, and we're not going to be 100% amenable to going forward, but fair is fair. As much as I criticize her, as much as I've, just been frustrated with her, I have to give her credit for taking the right stand on this. Now, the flip side, the lack of courage example, is the leader of the House, the Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson. So, some people are saying, well, he's overwhelmed and all that kind of stuff, and he never was really a leader. He's not overwhelmed. He's underwhelming. He's not even trying. He's not even asserting himself. The Speaker of the House is the second in succession to be the President of the United States. So if something happens to the President, something happens to the Vice President, Speaker of the House is next in line. And I'm looking at if something happened to President Trump, and then the next in line is J.D. Vance, Vice President Vance, and then the next in line is Speaker Johnson. Much as I despise the character and the tenor and the unprofessionalism and the lack of respect for the Constitution that President Trump has, I am praying for his health. You best believe I do not want that man to die any moment in this term. If he gets impeached, well, that is what it is. But dying, no, sir. I do not want to see the line of succession work. And I don't want to be in a situation where something happens to the president and the vice president, because then Mike Johnson would become the president of the United States. A man who acts like he can't even tie his shoes unless Donald Trump says you can do that would be the president. Somebody that doesn't even have the courage to just swear somebody in and let the chips fall where they may, right? And I'm not going to butcher it because I'm limited on time. I'm not going to butcher the young lady's name from Arizona, but most of y'all who follow the news know what I'm talking about. The young lady's been elected now. It's been 2 weeks, and she still hasn't been sworn in yet, right? Her senators came to her defense and showed up. Mike Johnson, they were actually having a press conference in front of his office, and then Johnson showed up, so they confronted him right there. Like, basically, you have nothing else to do at this point. And it's like, well, we got to do this. We got to be in session. It's like you say, man, this is what's getting ready to happen. See, because I wouldn't have had the press conference. This is just me now, strategizing. I wouldn't have had the press conference unless she was physically there. Just on the off chance that situation happened where Mike Johnson was standing right there. And it's like, I would have called her and said, hey, you can swear in right now in front of all these people. I got a Bible. You can swear her in right this minute and keep it moving. If you're worried about her being the deciding vote to make sure that the Epstein files is released, well, the House is not in session, so you can't do that then. You have to wait till you come back in session. And I know you want to go back in session. You have no choice because you're the Speaker of the House. You eventually have to come back in. But to disrespect the people of Arizona because you're too cowardly to deal with the chips as they may fall because you don't want to get the president angry. That's the cowardly lion will look at you and say, what is your problem, dude? What's going on with you? Because the Speaker of the House and the Vice President they run the Congress on paper. They're the heads of each branch of the Congress. So they're supposed to be autonomous of the president. Doesn't matter what party the president is. Yeah, if you're of the same party, you want to try to get the stuff that y'all mutually agree with, that y'all are random. There's going to be some times where you're not going to agree. And you're going to have to hash that out. Doesn't matter if the president is of your party or not of your party. That's the beauty of the legislative body. When I served in the legislature, I had the privilege of serving under 2 Republicans and 1 Democrat during my time. And I fought with all of them at some point. I mean, it was the Democratic governor that we had to override his veto. And we were a majority Democratic legislature. We were like the last one in the South. So, I just can't deal with somebody who has a position of power. I can't deal with somebody that's in a position of power like that. And they have no courage. None. So I want to end with this. Speaker Johnson, you might need to look at your fellow colleague, the lady from Georgia, and understand that it is politically okay for you to look the president in the eye and say, not this time. You on your own. I'm not toting the water for you. Because if we don't get a handle, if we don't get Congress to get their spine back, if we don't get Congress to be autonomous, then we're one step closer to that dreaded reality that the majority of us do not want. We do not want to slip from being a democracy into an autocracy. But Congress has to do their part. And, Thune may or may not come around. He's had moments. But Mike Johnson has not shown me any ounce of courage whatsoever. And at some point in time, if you want to be the Moses that God supposedly envisioned you with, told you in a dream that you were it, you were the modern day Moses. Moses had no equivocation about leading. Moses had no equivocation about courage. Moses looked at no other authority but God. Even his own brother, who tried to say, hey, you can't do that. We're going to have a discussion. If you're going to be Moses, you're going to have to lead. And cowards can't lead. Bottom line. All right, guys. Thank y'all for listening. Until next time.
NBG Podcast Network.